This is a chapter review for Vinland Saga 189, Misqe'g Pi'gw's Ritual. This is a chapter I talked about my expectations for in last review. If you remember from the previous chapter, the preview was that this chapter would be about the shaman's ritual, and sure enough, that's exactly what we got here. In my expectations, I laid out that I believe this would be the climactic turning point of the conflict for this arc. This would be where we get a huge turn in how the Lanu view the Norse and how they approach the situation that they're in. This ritual has been kind of hinted at and had some minor build-up in chapters leading up to this one. So Yukimura has been kind of laying the groundwork for this and telling us like it's a dangerous ritual, but it's like very important, and this is going to be the culmination of all the fears and concerns of the Lanu people, and essentially decide how are they going to approach the current situation. This chapter is doing exactly what I expected it to do, and I think it does a lot of things very well, but this chapter did end up being a little more controversial, and I'm going to talk about that at the end of the kind of read through. But for now, let's just get into it. So we start with the shaman in this sort of this very small, I guess like a hut would be the best way to describe it, but it's just this enclosed space in the snow here, and he's completely isolated, alone in there, and we can see there's smoke coming out the top of it here. And the kind of goal of this ritual is to connect with their ancestors. They expect to get a sort of vision and some kind of spiritual guidance through their ancestors here. And on this page we can see kind of what the nature of this ritual is, and we can kind of understand a little bit how it all works. We can see here that in the top of the page we have the shaman releasing smoke. So he was smoking something. And in the next panel we can see these little items from the forest, and you see him putting something into the fire in there. So he's in this small enclosed space with the smoke from this fire, and he's putting things into the fire, and he's smoking something himself, and he has all these things, and this is going to obviously kind of play into how these visions work. Because to them, in their culture, this is them connecting to the forest, connecting to their ancestors in a very like personal and powerful and spiritual ritual. But from an outside perspective here, Yukimura shows us that this involves stuff like smoking something, some kind of incense in the fire, and we can essentially kind of deduce here the logistical side of this, where this likely involves psychedelics. And more of that in this part here, we have Nisquaji talking to the elder here, and she talks about how he has only been gathering firewood and he hasn't been eating. He's only been eating snow, and that like this is a dangerous ritual. And I was in this page here. Sorry that yeah, he's only been eating snow. He hasn't been eating anything besides that, just to kind of stave away the hunger, but obviously that's not going to have any nutrients, that's not going to be actually fulfilling anything. It's just a mental thing of consuming this snow to kind of trick the body, I guess, into feeling like he has eaten. He's taken something in. And Nisquaji says something really important here, actually. The shaman has told her that this is his last attempt, and he does not want Nisquaji to succeed him, most likely because of the physical demands of this ritual. And the fact that This is his final chance, and nobody else will be doing this ritual. He's desperate for this ritual to provide answers. Because if this doesn't provide answers, then they will be going forward blindly without consulting their ancestors, and they will be hesitant to make any major decisions here. And we already talked about this. He's eating the snow, and now we kind of go back into isolation with the shaman here. The paneling here is really nice. This really connects us with the isolation and the kind of deprivation of this, because this ritual involves physical deprivation, social deprivation, and he's deprived of food, sight, and he's just isolated in here alone to try to find this connection as he has the smoke. And he says here, this secret elixir given to him by his predecessor. This is essentially Yukimura saying to us that this is putting him in a very, very difficult mental and physical place, and combine this with possibly psychedelics involved in this ritual, and it's very clear that combined with his predisposed fears towards what's going to be happening here, his preconceived notions of the Norse destroying the land and burning the trees and stuff like that, he's afraid, he's desperate, and he's deprived of food and everything that would make a human function properly. So essentially, he's going to see something, and that's what happens here. And we get the most insane chapter I think I've ever seen from Yukimura, where we have the shaman seeing a war of the future here. Now, Vinland is North America. That's very obvious to anyone. They refer to it as Vinland, and obviously North America is a very, very, very huge place, but our story with the Lanu people and Thorfinn is isolated into one part of North America, which is Prince Edward Island, and that's up in Canada, so that's obviously not modern day America, but I believe it's most likely that this is a depiction of the American Civil War. That would be my guess here, based on just the attire of people and the weaponry that's being used. This doesn't appear to be Revolutionary War. Whether or not it could be an actual more relevant war that takes place in the Prince Edward Island area, I'm not too sure myself. But either way, this is a war that's happening in the land of Vinland, and that's very, very, very important, because this is essentially to say and address the tragedy of the fact that war will come to Vinland. Here we have the shaman see bullets in a soldier, and he's obviously confused because all of this is so beyond his comprehension of his reality and his worldview. It's just so far ahead and so far advanced that he cannot really rationalize it in any way but through comparison. So he compares these bullets to invisible arrows. And once again, showing his limited worldview, he sees that both sides of this war are white men. And to him, all he knows of white men is that these are the Norse. So he believes this is an inter-Norse war. And his major concern is, where are the Lanu? Are they part of this war? And then we have an explosion, likely some kind of artillery here of a cannon, and he's just entirely shocked how beyond his comprehension this force is to tear up the land beneath him. It's terrifying, and it's loud, it's disorienting. And then the scene shifts. Now here we have him above a what he sees as a meadow, but once he looks closer, he sees that this is a cornfield. And he acknowledges that if this is all cornfields, what happened to the trees? What happened to the animals? What happened to the nature that we value so much, that our culture deems so important, connects us to the spirits and our ancestors? And it's an erasure of his culture, which depends on the land. Another interesting part of this page, though, is Yukimura choosing to use this imagery of the field. It's not just a field, it's a group of black men in extremely similar matching outfits tending to the fields together. And I believe this is Yukimura depicting slavery in North America, African slaves. And much like before, where Yukimura was trying to say war is going to come to Vinland, he's saying here slavery is going to come to Vinland. And obviously, if you've read Vinland Saga, you know the whole purpose of Thorfinn's retreat and the the desire to go somewhere not here that the story is all about. It's to escape war and slavery. Those are the two major things that the series has been discussing since its inception. And Yukimura is just showing us the tragedy of this, that yes, he's acknowledging it. These things are going to come to Vinland one day. Now here, after asking, where are all the animals, he gets his answer. A whole mound of animal pelts. Well, beaver pelts, specifically. Furs and beaver pelts. And this is just a complete different society from the Lanu society, where the forest and the forest creatures are so important. They're killed in mass and they're just piled up and packaged away, as we can see here on the left, in such a high quantity. And they're traded for weaponry. He recognizes here that these are the new people. So what he's seeing here is 100% the new people. So this is likely in the actual area of his tribe, in the Prince Edward Island area, where Lanu people have remained for a long time, and they didn't all leave. They've remained there quite a while, even to this day, I believe. So he sees his own people taking these weapons, and this panel is very, very, very interesting, because just like before, where Yukimura had us draw the parallel of the bullets to invisible arrows with the shaman, here Yukimura frames the gun exactly as he usually frames a panel of a sword. When a sword is brought up in Vinland Saga, especially in these later chapters where weaponry isn't as common and we're not on a battlefield, the sword gets so much focus, and the imagery of the hand grasping the sword, taking the sword, or receiving the sword is super important. And Yukimura perfectly replicates that feeling of the sword panel with this, the gun panel. And then the shaman sees his own people being consumed by war that they never would have been involved in had their lands not been occupied by what he believes to be the Norse. And then he sees these two images that are very, very just on point for exactly what European colonization did to these tribes. They brought war, destruction, and they brought illness. Illness has been kind of hinted at a little bit in the build up to the Vinland arc with the Sailing West chapters, where we see like rats get onto the boats, and they specifically give the new people milk, which they may not be able to consume, and illness being brought from from Europe and exposed to these people who have had lived in isolation all this time and had no exposure to these illnesses. They will be completely wiped out by it, even if that illness is not as impactful on someone from the other continent, because of this just complete lack of exposure. And then we go to the next panel here, well, next page rather, and we see machinery destroying the earth and fossil fuels of factories destroying the environment, destroying the air. And the environment and nature is so important in its connection to the new people's beliefs and their spirituality and their entire culture, and what was going to come from this colonization of the Norse coming from across the sea, is this destruction of their homes and way of life. And what's so tragic here is the small panel we have of these natives being forced west. This is likely a depiction of the Trail of Tears, which was a not exactly a trail, but it's essentially the mass migration of native peoples who are forced out of their homes and forced to go somewhere not here. And that is just so important to Vinland Saga, because we had Thorfinn and his friends looking to escape the world and go somewhere else, somewhere that is just not here, not with war, without slavery. And we can see that the Europeans coming to North America will put the natives in that same position. They will force them to go west and seek something else, and force them to find a place where they can be free of this. And the tragic part of all of this is that as readers in 2022, we know they can't escape. There isn't somewhere not here. There's just only the encroaching of the rest of the world, of war and slavery, injecting itself into the entire world until the whole world's been consumed. There's nowhere left for them to go, and they can keep going west, and eventually they'll reach water, and eventually they'll loop all around, and the world will not be free. Now here we have the shaman, and he finds a man, a new man, likely someone from the war that he had seen earlier, and just decayed, bullet wounds in his chest there. Just fought a war that didn't belong to him. He didn't need to fight in it. The shaman sees it as something that could have been prevented. And he takes in the fact that there must be so many more Norsemen, which we would know to be just Europeans in general, but to him these are just Norsemen, because that's all his worldview can permit him to understand. That there must be so many more, and Thorfinn is just the beginning. And this is a very justifiable reason to fear what Thorfinn represents. He represents the beginning. And then here we get a shine, and then a large roar and rumble. And the shaman just can't really understand what's going on. And then we get this panel, and this panel is absolutely incredible. Yukimura 100% made an incredible panel here. Probably one of the best full page spreads we've seen in this manga. And it's just so powerful, and it's so destructive. You can feel that massive shock of turning and seeing this right in your face. The fact that this is a two-page spread is 100% intended to shock you and be so in your face and abrupt. Just like how it would feel if you were this man not understanding what's going on and then just having to witness this pure destruction. Possibly one of the most evil and destructive things that humanity has ever created, an atomic bomb. And as he's being completely obliterated by the power of this weapon, he's terrified that this could even be made by humans. As he fades out, all he can think is, we have to be rid of them. We must be rid of the Norse. Their destruction is going to bring destruction upon us all. They're going to bring war to us, and our way of life is going to be destroyed. And then he comes out of the dream. Misqe'g wakes him up. His hair's gone gray from the stress and trauma of this event. His eyes are bulging. He's gasping for air, and he knows he must stop the Norse. And here in the bottom right, there is no land of peace to be seen in the future. So this chapter is absolutely wild. This is just so on the nose to show the tragic nature of this story. Yukimura acknowledges here, Thorfinn will fail. He will not create a land of peace because we live in the future where we know already what's going to happen. We know what becomes of the Americas. We know what will become of this small place where he's built his settlement. It's not going to remain that way. There will be destruction, and he will be forced out. One thing I really want to address here, though, is the nature of this chapter. So, in the beginning of this video, I talked about how this chapter is a little controversial, and I'm going to go into detail about that now. So, Vinland Saga has talked about spirituality and religion a lot in its runtime. It may not be the focus about it, and Yukimura may not have some explicit analysis or I guess opinion on religion. I don't believe he has a message surrounding religion here, but I do believe it's important to acknowledge that religion is very important to the series either way, because the nature of these wars that humanity fights and the wars and events we see in the prologue and in Baltic Sea War, it all involves religion either way, especially with their often comparison between Norse religion involving dying in battle and going to Valhalla versus Christianity, which we saw a lot of in the prologue. I do believe it'd be foolish to say religion isn't important to the series, even if it's not the main focus. But religion in Vinland Saga has always been treated a certain way, where nothing is ever very much confirmed. Like, we won't see something that can't be explained in any way that doesn't involve a religious or spiritual explanation. Characters seeing ghosts of people that they lost, like we see Hild seeing her master, Thorfinn seeing Askeladd and the men he's killed. Stuff like that can be explained with just interpretation of this being a visualization of the character's inner thoughts and conflicts. It's not an explicit demonstration of spirits and ghosts, and Yukimura even goes as far as to show blatant skepticism towards religion, such as with scenes of Baltic Sea War of soldiers dying and waiting for the Valkyries, but the Valkyries never come. And Canute's interpretation of God's cruelty. He doesn't exactly deny that God is real, instead he's angry at God for giving humanity a task that they cannot fulfill. And with all that in mind, it's very strange to see this chapter grant the shaman a very real and true vision of the future. We cannot deny this is American future, and this is so far beyond anything that the shaman could have conjured up in his own mind. This is very blatantly a vision of the future. And this is concerning to me, because like I said before, this vision is integral to what's going to happen with this conflict. This is the turning point. This is what the fears of the Lanu people are going to be based on, and their primary motivation going forward is to prevent what the shaman is seeing here. So having the nature of our conflict hinge on a true vision of the future that confirms Lanu's spirituality is very shocking for Yukimura, considering the amount of grounded skepticism that's been applied to other religions before this. Because having our conflict heavily depend on this vision forces us to just accept the reality of it so we can justify the actions of the Lanu. And we can sympathize and understand. Because to some, this may appear as a future sight plot now, where the shaman will take actions to prevent this world that he sees in the future, and in doing so will create that future. However, I don't think that this is where Yukimura is going with this, and I have a couple ideas of how I think this can still work, and why my concerns are not as strong as they were initially. So, to start with the ritual, we talked here about how the shaman is isolated, physically deprived, socially deprived, and has been taking in likely psychedelics. So he's smoking here, putting something into the fire, and he's surrounded by this fire in this small enclosed space, not eating anything but snow. So he is in a very, very physically drained and deprived state. So I think, based on these conditions, and the pre-existing fears that he already has of seeing the Norse in Thorfinn's settlement destroy the trees, he is already afraid. And he is in a scenario now where his mind is going to be out of control, undergoing this ritual. This is to them a spiritual thing, but looking at it logistically, it does involve having the mind go to a place where it cannot properly function. And this is not to say, of course, that I disagree with the Lanu culture here, not at all. But there is something to be said about the nature of the ritual and how his mind is being set up to take in these visions by having the secret elixir and smoking and being isolated and deprived. So I believe that guarantees his mind is going to conjure up something, and his pre-existing fears guarantee that that something will be what he's looking for. Because like we talked about here, this is his last attempt, and it's physically demanding. He does not want Misqe'g to undergo this. So he's desperate, he's deprived, and he's afraid. So I believe no matter what, he's going to see something that embraces the fears in his mind and gives him guidance because he desperately needs it. So then we might ask, why did Yukimura choose to show something so blatantly our future? Why didn't he choose to show something more vague, to kind of provide this same trip and same revelation without explicitly going beyond his comprehension? And I believe that because we know he's going to see something bad here due to how he's been preconditioned based on the ritual and his own fears, Yukimura would instead choose to show something here that's relevant to us. I believe this chapter is not to introduce a plot point that the shaman has to understand and interpret. I believe this is Yukimura using the opportunity of the ritual to canonically show us relevant imagery and have the reader draw these connections and acknowledge the overwhelmingly tragic nature of this story. I think one thing a lot of people have been concerned about in recent chapters of Vinland Saga is how things are going very well for Thorfinn right now, and people are concerned that Yukimura will allow Thorfinn to get away with more than the world realistically would. And I believe Yukimura is using this chapter to address us and show an overwhelmingly blatant vision of the tragic future that this story is going to inevitably end up in. This isn't like Attack on Titan, where we have a future sight plot and time shenanigans. This is Yukimura using the opportunity of the shaman inevitably seeing something that's going to embrace his own fears and be inspired by his own fears, something that his mind is going to create. And he could have seen anything here, but Yukimura wanted to show us something and show war in Vinland, slavery in Vinland, the destruction of his homes, the damage we are capable of, and the absolute cruel destruction that we will inevitably cause in this land. And I believe from this perspective, this chapter is very strong. And I think that the negative reactions are very justified based on just concerns about the storytelling and how this story is supposed to be a very human story that talks about our very real weaknesses as a people, where our fears and lack of communication will have us turn against each other, and the inability to understand each other being what brings upon us war and destruction and suffering. And that is essentially what we get here. But it's a little bit muddied by the idea that this is a true vision of the future, which, not in a way to deny any spirituality out there, any religion, but with a story like this that has been very grounded and hasn't liked to show preference towards any specific religion in terms of what's real and what's not, it is a little concerning that the entire conflict would hinge on the reality of this vision. But going back to the shaman's perspective, he cannot comprehend most of this. He will not be able to likely retain most of it due to his physical state. And he was going to see something based on his fears. So taking that into account, I think this can be used very well still, because it is real. because these rituals are real. Whether or not they actually show the true future is left to be determined by us. But still, in the new culture and native culture, these connections to the spirits, their ancestors, and visions of the future and prophecy, these are real parts of their culture. And Yukimura is not just making something up here to give us a future plot. This is just taking the vehicle of these real rituals and addressing the reader with very relevant imagery to the story. Because Vinland Saga ultimately wants the reader to take the experience of Thorfinn and these past conflicts and learn from it and apply it to our modern day and to be kinder people. And having imagery of the modern day is important in achieving that. And this is something I kind of expected from Vinland Saga. I thought maybe the end of the manga we'd get some relevant imagery in some kind of time jump just to kind of draw that connection. But Yukimura uses the ritual to do it instead, and I think that's okay. I think it really kind of hinges on how Yukimura treats this ritual. If he has a full embrace of this being a vision of the future and makes that aspect of it too important, I think this could still rub people, including me, the wrong way. But overall, it's a very strong set of images to address the reader, in my opinion. And just using the reality of these rituals and the psychedelics, the physical deprivation, to justify bringing this imagery into the story. So, overall, the art in this chapter was incredible, and having some faith in Yukimura and having some hope in how he will handle this story, which I really do have. This is a very, very strong chapter, and probably one of the most compelling chapters we've gotten in a long time. So I'm very happy with this. I'm a little hesitant, but I'm really, really looking forward to the future, because I do believe Yukimura knows what he's doing, and he will give us very satisfying and very human and very real conflict. As long as we're able to understand the nature of this ritual and how it impacts us as readers and as people who can understand this imagery. Because I believe that's the real focus here. Now, next chapter. Canute looks towards the snow-covered Vinland from the other side of the sea. Now, I'm somebody who never thought we'd get Canute perspective again. So I'm very, very excited for this, because even though I didn't expect it, I definitely want it. So, this is awesome. Canute has been a secondary protagonist for so long, and in the farm arc he may have been more of an antagonist, and he's kind of an external force in Baltic Sea War and currently. Well, currently he's more of an idea, and he doesn't really have a reach into Thorfinn's story anymore. But despite the lack of real focus on him, I still believe he is an important parallel story, and I'm very happy Yukimura is looking to do more with this. Now, I expect this to be a break from the narrative, considering what we just got is the climactic ritual, the turning point of the story. This is our breather, and we're taking a step back, and we're getting Canute's perspective on his, I guess, introspection towards how Thorfinn might be doing. I believe it's extremely unlikely that this will be similar to the farm arc again, where Canute's perspective will eventually collide with Thorfinn. I don't think he's going to have an influence on the Vinland storyline at all. I think we're just taking a step back to address him and likely get some closure for his character. I believe we've gotten enough closure for Canute where it can be justified that he does not show up anymore, but I think he's important enough to have another chapter for him and to give the reader more closure because he's really important to the story, and his relation to Thorfinn and him being kind of the other side of the coin in this struggle for peace on Earth is really important. So I'm glad we can go back and see him, and just as Thorfinn will eventually fail, we might get some foreshadowing towards the eventual fall of Canute's Northern Sea Empire. Because eventually in history, Canute the Great will die and his empire will fall. And just like Thorfinn's settlement, that's an inevitability. So it will be very interesting if Yukimura decides to address this. And overall, I'm just really excited to see Canute again, because he's an absolutely incredible character. Okay, with that, that is my review of 189. This chapter is amazing and concerning, but I'm really looking forward to seeing how Yukimura will follow this up once we get our break from Canute and come back to Vinland and see where this is going to take Lanu and how this is going to affect Thorfinn and his mission in Vinland. But for now, we're just going to have to wait and see as we kind of cool down from the absolutely insane events of this chapter. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next month.